Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents On Message, How a Compelling Narrative Will Make Your Organization Succeed, by Zach Friend. Narrated by Chris Abernathy. Introduction. The kids in room 207 were misbehaving again. Spitballs stuck to the ceiling, paper planes whizzed through the air. They were the worst behaved class in the whole school. The teacher read these words from Harry Allard's iconic book, Miss Nelson is Missing, to my niece's kindergarten class that late summer day. There are times in the summer in San Diego when you wonder why anyone pays attention to anything other than the outside world. Warm days, warm nights, and parents that tell you to get outside before you drive them crazy. This was one of those days. I showed up to my niece's class a few minutes early and decided to stand in the back and watch. I had been visiting my family during a college break after a quarter in which I'd taken a dreaded astronomy class. Each class period, the professor would drone out a daily roll call that reminded me of Ben Stein and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was bad enough that I was a humanities student taking this class only to fulfill an unmet science credit. But what did I ever do in life to deserve a class consisting of reams of overhead projections full of mathematical theorems and boring data? Whatever happened to the pictures of the supernovas? In contrast, this kindergarten room was filled with pictures and colors, visuals that spoke more than words ever could. It was 85 degrees outside and the beach was calling. But in the room, even this late in the school day, the group of 6-year-olds was captivated. As the teacher read, she explained that Miss Nelson is a grade school teacher who never yelled and gave the easiest assignments. But her students took advantage of her, misbehaving and showing disrespect. One day, Miss Nelson does not come to school. She is replaced by a substitute, Miss Viola Swamp, who is strict and loads the kids down with homework. The kids become discouraged and hope that Miss Nelson comes back. Eventually, Miss Nelson returns to class and the children rejoice. Of course, Miss Swamp was Miss Nelson all along, just in a costume. My niece's classmates were enthralled by the story. After all, this was a class just like their class, with a teacher just like theirs. They were learning about the complex subjects of respect, teamwork, and responsibility, but they were doing it through a simple story. It got me wondering, how is it that a teacher can keep the attention of this group of kids, especially in a hot classroom at the end of the day? Why do college professors, like my astronomy teacher, unsuccessfully communicate with statistics and facts, while kindergarten teachers captivate through stories? The answer is simple. Kindergarten teachers have discovered the secret to communications. In order to captivate an audience and engage them in the message you seek to communicate, you have to use the principle of storytelling, an emotional narrative. The concept of an emotional narrative has been expressed for centuries by well-known historical figures. In 20 seconds, John F. Kennedy challenged us to ask not what your country can do for you, while Martin Luther King beautifully said, I have a dream. Why did these statements stick? Also, why do you easily remember your child's birthday, but can't remember the years of the First World War or the date you started your last job? Again, it's simple. One set has a personal, emotional component, and the others do not. Kennedy and King were able to build on emotional narratives with some of the most powerful 20-second statements in our history. They didn't waste time with complex messages or fact-laden rhetoric. They built an emotional narrative. Have you ever wondered why terms like death tax resonate? Or how it is that everyone knows the logo for Target, but not for U.S. Airways? Why do CEOs and politicians spend years thinking about what they are going to say, when more than 90% of communication is how things are said? And just what does the 250-year-old Gresham's Law of Information tell us about how to use social media effectively? On Message answers these questions through a common link: emotion and narratives. A simple guide to this book. This book features a collection of easy-to-digest stories and insights from politics, advertising, business, entertainment, and social psychology. It lays out a step-by-step plan of how to create a long-lasting winning narrative for your business, organization, or campaign through stories, emotion, and effective messaging. It's a simple how-to for building a powerful emotional narrative and why that narrative works. Let's face it, theory can be boring. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more theorists in this world. Without relying heavily on complex concepts or data, that is, theory, this book shows that there is an empirical basis for creating an emotional narrative, simple core message, and more. Each chapter provides practical ways to build your own brand. Chapters 1 and 2 focus on the building blocks, narrative and messaging. These chapters describe the development of an emotional narrative and message, and reveal why people can communicate better with stories than with data. Through simple and familiar examples, each chapter will show how to create an effective emotional narrative and provide a how-to section on message development, including a message box and the power of the 2x2 matrix. Did you know that more than 75% of communication is nonverbal? Chapter 3 focuses on the power of nonverbal communication and explains how to be aware of what you are communicating without words. Chapter 4 takes you into branding and helps answer why most people know the logo for Target, Nike, and Apple, but not for U.S. Airways. This chapter provides examples of successful and unsuccessful branding and how you can create a brand that will last for your business, nonprofit, or organization, or for yourself. Chapter 5 focuses on images and helps explain why college professors unsuccessfully communicate with statistics and facts, while kindergarten teachers captivate through stories and pictures. It attests to the success of using imagery in your business communication to persuade your audience to support your goals. Furthermore, it demonstrates the power of images and the relationship between pictures and memory. So often we believe that data provides the basis for proving facts and retaining information, but as this chapter illustrates, cognitive psychologists have shown that images last much longer in memory than data alone. Chapter 6 shows how effective communicators use emotionally compelling frames to help shape public opinion. It explains why terms like death tax work. Terms like this are frames, or ways of presenting the same information in different ways. Chapter 7 will show you how to use small amounts of personal emotional information to have the greatest social media impact. The chapter shows what the 250-year-old Gresham's Law of Information tells us about how to use social media effectively. It also explains how to generate traditional media coverage through social media and why credibility still matters, even in a digital world. Chapter 1. Narrative. How the Berenstain Bears know why narrative rules. When I was a kid, my parents read to me from the Berenstain Bears collection of children's books. In fact, I consumed them with such interest that it became a weekend tradition to hit the local garage sales in search of book replenishment. I demanded all bears all the time. From pajamas to linens, I wanted to see Papa and Mama Bear constantly smiling at me. At the time, I didn't know I was being sold their brand through an effective narrative. And quite frankly, my parents didn't care as long as I went to bed on time. But what's telling is how the authors did it. They established a trusted narrative through something as simple as a children's story. If you're not familiar with the Bears and their 300-plus books, you're missing out on a key element of narrative. The Berenstain Bears' rhythmic authors, Stan and Jan Berenstain, told complex stories of job loss, friendship, trust, new babies, and more through simple and emotional stories. They established a bond with the reader. You trusted the family. After all, they were like your family. You began to emotionally relate with the books as they told stories about moving or new siblings, or even the difficulty of money in the household. They told intricate stories in an accessible way. Each book often had a story arc complete with a plot, conflict, and clear moral resolution to the issue. Over time, the Berenstains established a narrative of a family, just like yours, that was working hard and doing everything they could to make the right decisions despite difficult circumstances. It was easy to trust the Bears. Their product brand was a direct offshoot of this narrative. They sold products that were kid-friendly and mother-approved. I'm pretty sure there are no sanctioned Berenstain Bears lingerie. Under this established narrative, the authors were able to successfully sell more than 250 million copies of their books worldwide, and they were able to do it through storytelling. Why is this possible? Marco Iacoboni, a professor of biobehavioral sciences at UCLA, claims we are physically wired to learn through storytelling. Evolution shaped our brains to learn through narrative, he notes. In fact, he believes that our physiology allows us to emotionally engage with stories in ways we can't with data alone. Jerome Bruner, one of the leaders of cognitive psychology, noted that children communicate through simple stories even before they can effectively speak. We have evolved to establish narratives in order to organize complex thoughts. In other words, nothing is more important than the narrative. We want to learn from stories. We want to organize our lives in a narrative way. We want to connect emotionally. All other elements, framing, messaging, branding, need to be based on these narratives. One way to look at it is that narrative is the foundation by which you build your brand. Just as buildings cannot be built without a strong foundation, neither can a business or a political campaign be built without a compelling narrative. And the rewards of a successful narrative will become clear. Thaler Picard, a frequent lecturer at Columbia University and an expert on the power of storytelling, claims that when an organization embraces narrative and applies it throughout its work, brand identity is clear and appealing, audiences are quickly and sustainably engaged, and knowledge is easily gathered and shared. One such organization that uses this power of narrative is the Susan G. Komen for the Cure, a nonprofit organization that bases their organizational narrative on emotionally compelling stories from cancer survivors and caregivers. The narrative created through Komen and their ubiquitous pink ribbons is one of unity. Through their powerful narrative, the organization has created a viral product that has engaged their target audiences and has shared a complex message of support through the wearing of a pink ribbon. So, how do you go about creating your own narrative? Establishing your narrative. What exactly is a narrative? In movies or literature, narrative is simply the story. In politics and business, it is your story. For Toyota, it is an established story of reliability and quality. For Ronald Reagan, it is of optimism in America and conservative values. For the Salvation Army, it is the powerful impact your donation can make on someone's life. All of these narratives are so commonly accepted, we don't even realize that they needed to be created in the first place. Narrative translates knowing into telling. It provides the bridge from facts and figures into something that we are wired to understand. In other words, narrative helps us interpret the world. It guides us to highlight certain things and ignore others. Narrative provides the framework for understanding complex issues and making sense of the world around us. For your business, nonprofit, or political campaign, everything needs to flow from your narrative. If your narrative is weak, it will be defined for you. And if your messaging, framing, and branding are incongruent with your narrative, you will simply lose. All good narratives need to be constructed, and luckily, they all follow similar models of construction. Tell me a story. Human beings have a passion for plots. Our lives, in many ways, are stories. We have a beginning, middle, and end, a story arc complete with a few interesting plot twists in between. It's natural, then, that we want to organize our understanding in a narrative way. As University of Connecticut English professor Patrick Collum Hogan has noted, stories are shared in every society, in every age, and in every social context. Stories, in many ways, provide the greatest ability for us to understand and learn. Behind even the abstractions of science, the Professor Walter Ong wrote, there lies narrative of the scientific observations. Why? So we can understand the abstract elements more easily. Science students write up experiments. They narrate what they did and what happened when they did it, to provide the reader a clearer understanding of science. Narratives help us learn. They help us take abstract concepts and understand them in our own constructs. As British classicist Eric Havelock noted in his research, knowledge cannot be managed in elaborate, scientifically abstract categories. In fact, he points out that entire ancient cultures were focused on narrative and oral tradition, which influences how we learn and understand today. Oral cultures cannot generate abstract categories, so they use stories of human action to store, organize, and communicate much of what they know, Havelock says. Most oral cultures generate substantial narratives such as stories of the Trojan Wars among the ancient Greeks, the coyote stories among various Native American populations, and the spider stories in Belize, he continues. Culturally, we have evolved to understand complexity through narratives. Oral traditions, which didn't have written text as a main communications method, used stories to teach. Gustav Freytag, a German novelist and critic of the 19th century, observed that all effective stories follow a similar structure. Calling it Freytag's pyramid, he constructed a pattern in the form of a pyramid to analyze the plot structure of dramas, which built upon a model that Aristotle had noted 2,000 years earlier. Freytag's observed method showed that narrative structure, introduction, conflict, struggle, resolution, was one of the most effective ways to communicate a story. Now, more than 2,000 years later, kindergarten teachers, Hollywood producers, and political speechwriters are still using the same narrative method. What makes a good narrative? A good narrative is simple, emotional, and true. It's unfortunate that the last part even needs to be pointed out, but it seems that truth has become a prized commodity lately, and it's important to note that you can't create a false narrative and expect it will stand the test of time. Right, Bernie Madoff? So, how do you go about constructing a good narrative? British literary critic Frank Kermode compared the structure of a narrative to the ticking of a clock. Each tick creates an expectation for the corresponding tock. Specifically, the structure creates an expectation or challenge, tick, and a resolution, tock. For example, think about a good movie you've seen recently in theaters. What made it good? It told a compelling emotional story. In fact, when a good story is told, you ignore the fact that 90 minutes have passed sitting in a cramped theater. Take one of my favorite movies, Casablanca. Everybody loves Casablanca, or at least loves Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. From the outset, the film creates serious tension and emotion. Here's the narrator's opening. With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully, or desperately, toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point. But not everybody could get to Lisbon directly, and so a tortuous, roundabout refugee trail sprang up. Paris to Marseille, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train, or auto, or foot, across the rim of Africa to Casablanca, in French Morocco. Here, the fortunate ones, through money or influence or luck, might obtain exit visas and scurry to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to the New World. But the others wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait. Okay, so from the outset, you're waiting for the elements of the good narrative to come out. Well, the story strikes an emotional chord. As MGM Studios described it, the movie is a story of former lovers briefly united in the chaos of war. Bogart is Rick, a world-weary nightclub owner who claims, "I stick my neck out for nobody." Bergman is Ilsa, fleeing the Nazis with her resistance hero husband. Only Rick can help the pair escape, but he refuses, until Ilsa reawakens his idealism. Emotion is high in this film. It ends, I don't think this is much of a spoiler, at the peak of emotional resolution. Bogart risking it all so his former lover can live a better life with her husband. Why is it that we remember this film? Why do we remember lines like, "Here's looking at you, kid," and "Play it once, Sam, for old time's sake"? It is because Casablanca created an emotional narrative. a story that resonated with the time and led the viewers through from beginning, challenge, to end, resolution. These three elements are key. As uber-successful movie producer and businessman Peter Guber tells it, a good story has three main components: challenge, struggle, resolution. Casablanca shows you the challenge of the difficulties in a war-torn area and the disincentive of sticking your neck out for anyone, to the struggle of Bogart meeting with his ex-lover just to see she is with her husband and needs his help in securing exit papers, to the ultimate resolution of Bogart doing everything possible to help his ex and her husband live a better life. With this emotionally compelling narrative, the viewer was ready for the famous lines. But those lines would have meant nothing without the initial emotional connection. Creating your own narrative. So, assuming you're not a writer for hit Hollywood films, how do you accomplish the three components of challenge, struggle, and resolution in your own narrative? You can do it in three simple steps. First, you get your listeners' attention with a challenge or compelling question. Next, give your listeners an emotional experience by narrating the struggle to overcome that challenge or finding the answer to the opening question. In other words, allow each listener to put himself or herself at the center of the narrative. Finally, galvanize your listener's response with a resolution that calls them to action. Everyone from Hollywood and Wall Street executives down to mom-and-pop shops encouraging you to buy local uses this formula every single day. Think about it. Ever watch yogurt commercials? The challenge? Getting into that bathing suit for summer. The struggle? Overcoming chocolate cravings and your friends' peer pressure for pizza night. The resolution? Hawaiian dream vacation with a perfectly fitting bathing suit. Madison Avenue has this formula down. Notice that the commercial doesn't try and bog down the viewer with data. When was the last time you saw a yogurt ad that said, 35% of our consumers will lose 3 pounds in 2 months, while 25% will lose 5 pounds in 2 months? Never. Data does not resonate in the same way the bathing suit does. But what's interesting is they are both saying the same thing. After all, you may be only a few pounds shy of fitting into that suit. But the image of the suit resonates emotionally, not the boring data. Why does this work? A large part of the yogurt commercial's effectiveness is the ability to put the consumer in the center of the narrative. The customer watching the commercial easily empathizes with the plight of the person in the ad. They think, hey, that could be me. And if the customer believes they can be the person in your story, then they are more likely to connect with the person in the ad. The same thing rings true at the local level. Take, for example, your local bookstore. The challenge? Maintaining sales against internet giants and big box stores. The struggle? David fighting Goliath. The resolution? The consumer supporting their neighbors and buying local. The bookstore ad doesn't focus on the percentage of lost sales or the tax advantage of internet pricing or anything else that will lose your interest. The data are inherent in the image of David taking on Goliath. And there is an emotional connection to your neighbors and locality that compels you to support them. You can see yourself fighting the big guy. You can easily put yourself at the center of the bookstore's narrative. Often the challenge is depicted in terms of heroes and villains. In the yogurt commercial, the villain is your current body weight, and the hero is your key lime pie yogurt. For local bookstores, the internet retailers are the villains, and the hero is your friend and neighbor, the bookstore owner. In the world of cops and robbers, well, that's self-explanatory. In business, the hero is your product, and the villain is the other product. In political campaigns, the villain is simply the other candidate. I know this does little to elevate the discourse in our society, but there's a point. The hero, as Peter Guber notes, is the person, place, product, or brand that enables your audience to feel the change your story promises. In other words, your hero will charge through to the call to action, the resolution. Just like in every children's story and every made-for-TV movie, there is a hero. And in every political campaign, the hero candidate is the savior to fix all of society's ills. Let's look back at Susan G. Komen for the cure again. Remember, A compelling narrative should be simple, emotional, and true. It should offer up a challenge, put the audience at the center of the story, a struggle, and provide a resolution. We can deconstruct the Komen narrative to see if it meets all of these components. Komen claims to be the world's largest grassroots network of breast cancer survivors and activists fighting to save lives, empower people, ensure quality care for all, and energize science to find the cures. We are fighting every minute of every day to finish what we started and achieve our vision of a world without breast cancer. Seems pretty straightforward, especially on the hero and villain part. I'm pretty sure no one is rooting for cancer in this one. Is the story they are trying to tell simple? Yes. Komen wants to guide people through the breast cancer experience, save lives, and bring groups together, think the pink ribbon, to end breast cancer. Is it emotional? It's hard to imagine something more emotionally compelling than cancer survivors telling their stories and mobilizing groups to show strength, unity, and support. Is it true? Unfortunately, it is all too true. That is why the last part of their story is so important, to energize science to find the cures. Breast cancer continues to be a major issue that needs advocates like Komen. So Komen met the first elements of a good narrative, but in order to ensure that the narrative resonates, they need to offer up a challenge, struggle, and resolution. Does it? Challenge. Komen presents two challenges within its narrative. Cancer is challenging enough, but second, it presents an empowerment component for those going through a cancer experience. Plus, it's easy to see that cancer is the villain in this storyline. Audience at center of story. The audience is the story in Komen organization. Through events including the race for the cure, other fundraisers, and wearing pink ribbons, the audience is part of the struggle. Resolution. Working toward our vision of a world without breast cancer. In other words, we are our own solution. Through unity, education, research, and more, we can resolve this challenge. Komen uses data to back up their stories, but not to drive their stories. Their narrative is created through emotion and simplicity, and resonates because of this. When creating your own narrative, you can use the simple matrix to ensure that the following questions are answered. Is my narrative simple, emotional, and true? Does it provide a challenge, struggle, where the audience is the center of the story, and a resolution? Coca-Cola found a hero in Coca-Cola. The hero and villain method was extremely successful for Coca-Cola. Suffering from anemic sales in the 1980s, not to mention an identity crisis, if you remember the various incarnations of Coke, former CEO Roberto Goizueta sought to jumpstart sales through targeting a villain, Pepsi. He used this method to rally his own employees and provide a clear vision for the company. The result? Bringing back the original Coke formula. Ultimately, the timeless flavor and unique formula of Coca-Cola was the narrative. It helped frame the choice between their product and Pepsi, and eventually salvaged sales. The challenges for Coca-Cola were the sagging sales and the struggle against their villain, Pepsi. The resolution for Coca-Cola was not being Coke, but Coca-Cola, being true to their original self. And they've worked hard to protect the narrative of originality ever since. They've gone back to being what they branded as the real thing. This isn't to say that when marketing yourself, you should make yourself a hero. We'll leave that kind of ego to the late-night motivational speakers. But you should put yourself in your narrative, and then work to connect your story to those that you are looking to reach. If you personalize it in a simple and emotional way, it will be easy for the audience to feel they can connect to your story. Effective parents inherently get this. How often have you heard parents say, "I remember how I felt when that happened to me"? Such a comment places the parents at the center of the narrative, yet allows them to connect to their audience in a simple, emotional, and genuine way. This American Life. I have a confession to make. I listen to public radio. When I'm not listening to How to Get My Car Fixed on Car Talk, or hoping to get Carl Castle's voice on my home answering machine on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, I find myself checking out Ira Glass's master storytelling show, This American Life. For those not familiar with This American Life, it is a weekly public radio show broadcast on more than 500 stations to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?